Welcome to the Empowering Choices Parenting Podcast. My name is Joshua.
I am Lucas.
And I'm Eric.
Lucas and Eric are licensed professional counselors, and this is going to be part 2 of our podcast, When Your Child Wants to See Deadpool and They're 9.
So if you watched the first episode, you know that it was possibly a little bit short.
Yes.
But we hope that was at least enough amusing, and that part 2 is released shortly enough that you can also see what
you were trying to make a point there.
Yeah, and Eric, you had a commentary about the point that I was trying to make. You were wondering if the words that I used in part 1 were "be the parent, don't let them," right? And so, explain what you think could potentially be a problem with that, so we can hash on that a little bit.
Well, and a part of the statement is "be the parent." So, what does that imply, and how does that come out between you and your child? And I think, kind of what you were getting at is don't let your kids see something that may be harmful to them just because they want to see it.
That's a very good, reasonable interpretation of how that could be taken. Yeah.
Right. And so, know your kid. My parents, when I was 8 or 9, I wanted to see Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. My parents had to go see those movies first
because they weren't sure what was in them.
They weren't sure what was in them, and they had to discuss it and see if it would be the right movies for me to see and my brother, based on who we were.
And so it wasn't a clear-cut answer. They watched it and then went, "I'm not sure. Let's talk about it some more."
Right. Well, they said that before they even watched it, so I knew this was going to be at least a month. At least a month.
At the premiere.
Right. And my friends are already seeing it, and so I'm already hearing about all the parts and and seeing the cards that come out and going, "Oh my gosh, what is this stuff?"
All the merchandise.
Oh wow, yeah. And so they watched it and they discussed it, and I almost didn't get to go see Raiders of the Lost Ark. They thought Star Wars was something that I could handle okay at the age of 9. But Raiders of the Lost Ark, in the end of the movie where they open the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, spoiler alert.
Yep. Well, it's been out for what, 30 years?
I know, right?
Yeah. Okay. So if you haven't seen it,
stop listening quick.
Yeah, exactly. But then the human beings began to melt.
And it's fairly well. I mean, the CGI was particularly good for its day too.
It was very good for its day. And they said, you know what, we don't know that you're going to be able to handle that well. And now this is based on other TV shows that I had seen, that they had tried to shield me from, that they had watched, and I had not done well with the little snippets that I had seen
of similar type,
similar
body horror type experiences.
Yeah, vampires, body snatchers, some different things like this. And it gave me nightmares or kept me up. And they said, we don't think that's going to be good for you. And I said, okay, tell you what, you tell me what the scene is and I'll just look away. And
make a deal.
And my plan is I'll look away like this.
Sure, right? As one of my clients talked about, safety squints.
Yeah.
Right? If you're working on something and you really need to be wearing safety goggles, no, safety squints. Just it'll be fine.
Yeah, you'll just squint it out. Yeah. No. And so my plan was, I'm fine. I'm going to handle this fine. There's no problem here. Well, they actually said, okay, you can see that, but just promise you'll look away. Oh yeah, I'll look away.
Sure, right?
You bet.
Exactly with that facial expression and tone of voice too.
I'm gonna look away.
Yes, Mom and Dad.
No,
yes.
It was much more serious. I had to convince them. I went and did great through Star Wars. Got into Raiders of the Lost Ark. I had a little bit of problems where the bad guy got sent into the airplane propeller. And my point is, what I learned about myself over the years is I don't do well with a human being disassembled.
There's a really good euphemism, Eric.
Right? And so that for me is it's something that bothers me a lot. And I've seen that throughout my life. I've seen that as an adult in different movies. There are certain movies. I will not see any of the Saw movies. I barely made it through the first one. And so I know this inherently about myself. my parents had sensed that, and they were trying to help me be able to learn this about me. And, just because you're an adult doesn't mean you can handle anything that happens on the screen.
Well, you just said you're not going to see the remaining Saw films,
Exactly.
even now as an adult, because you're like, that wouldn't be a good idea for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when it came to that scene, and I knew it, and I knew it was coming, and I took a breath, and I'm like, I can do this.
You're ready.
And
Sure, right? Yeah.
I was ready to go. I'm doing what I said I would do.
Right.
And
Put my hand in
then
front of my face.
They started to melt, and I went, oh my gosh, look away.
Absolutely do look away.
But I saw enough of it that it stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
And when, afterwards, my parents are like, well, how'd it go? And I'm like, okay, well, here's the thing. Star Wars was awesome. Raiders of the Lost Ark, I had a little bit of problem. And they said, did you watch the end scene? I'm like, no. I had a little bit of problem with the propeller and the guy. And my dad's like, I didn't think about that one. Yeah, okay. And he goes, but it was okay after that. You looked away. And I went, yeah, I looked away. and he said, well, then how did you do when it started? And I said, then I looked away. And he's like, you're going to have problems tonight. Probably am. So the point with Deadpool is that Deadpool is of a quality that your kids might have problems with it. And, we've always said in all of our parenting material, know your child. Mm-hmm. Know your child well enough to know, is this something that they really can handle, or is it something they can't? Because, there are going to be some kids that are going to handle Deadpool just fine, and it's going to be like anything else. But there are other kids that it is really going to bother, and, you have to know your child well enough to know, is this going to be an okay thing for them, or is it going to be something that really is going to cause them problems?
Well, and then your example was around, you said people being disassembled, right? And so I remember as a kid, I had a much more sensitive gag reflex than I do now. And that was around a variety of things. Various foods sometimes I would get gaggy around, but then watching things on TV, particularly medical things, right? It would make me, I had a very sensitive stomach, I guess. I don't know if there's a better word to describe that, but it would literally kind of almost make me ill or nauseous or and I don't have that kind of reaction as an adult anywhere close to the same way that I did as a kid. So you're talking about something that you're even as an adult, maybe I don't want to watch this content. And then my experience is as an adult, I feel like I'm more able to watch more mature content than I was able to because of changes that have happened. So you're talking about an experience that maybe was fairly consistent across your life. Mine maybe had some changes.
It's really interesting what you're saying. Because as we train interns in the counseling world, graduate level interns, we use some different shows, such as House and ER, to have them
which
watch,
have those medical elements,
those medical components, and
surgery scenes.
I have heard from some of our interns, I don't know if I can handle watching those shows. I didn't watch them for that reason. I didn't watch them when they first came out. I struggle with blood and these components. And so, I think it's two really good examples. Some things you may not ever just get over. It's just a part of you. I was a professional photographer for 2 different fire departments. My wife and my best friend tried so hard to get me to be in the medical world with them,
paramedic.
EMTs, and he's now a paramedic. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, why? Why don't you want to do that? I'm like, because they bleed.
Sure, and that wouldn't be a good thing.
I'm like, and they're like, yeah, that's the great part of it. I'm like, not for me.
The great part of it.
Same thing with them. They're like, hey, come and help us, be with us to put the fire out. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. They're like, why? I'm like, because you want me to go into a building that's on fire. That's the fun of it. Not for me.
Sure, right. Average human thinks no.
Right. Yeah. And so you have to see those different things. And at 9, you don't know which way that's going to go. And, it reminds me of a grade schooler that I had. And mom would say, she has nightmares, quite often throughout the week. And I'm like, okay, tell me about the nightmares. And they sounded, kind of sci-fi-ish. And so I said, what is she watching?
Right.
And
what media is she consuming?
there's a lot of sci-fi. And I'm like, any chance that we could, see if the sci-fi is bleeding into the, nightmares? And the parent hadn't even thought about it at that time. And so they curtailed her from watching the sci-fi, and the nightmares went away.
I had a client similarly would talk about nightmares and then also talk about, I think they said every other person in their family was into like horror and suspense and the supernatural. And they're like, it's on the TV all the time. And we had that discussion. I'm like, okay, like how can you, yeah.
And it's different. I mean, I am a Walking Dead fan.
Oh, right. And I watched the first episode of that with my wife, and we both agreed, too gory, no thank you.
Right, and I'm on the train of going, oh my gosh, I loved that show, and still watch that show. But there is, but it's not. It's a dead human being, so it registers differently in my brain. But there's places where it's like, okay, you're getting a little close to where I might go, yeah, I'm done. But because in, I think it was season 10, forgive me if I get it wrong, but they killed horribly, graphically, two major characters. They walked into that season with 3 million viewers, and at the end of 2.5 hours, 1 million viewers nationwide had dropped out.
Wow.
It was that gory. And that fit into, oh my gosh, you disassembled a human being. And so there's different levels, different places. As adults, we have logical thinking. We don't have the emotional, foundational thinking that we have as human beings from 0 to 18. So we can look at it and process it, now in a different way. Doesn't mean it still won't affect you that way, but at 9, you're only processing it one way.
Right. And to me, it seems like when I think about like things that I saw as a kid, it's almost like there's a different level of sear into your memory.
Yes.
That as an adult, I've still seen things that sear into my memory to some level. But as a kid, it didn't take that much. And one of the things I think about with our son as we kind of think about how to navigate today's current landscape is the very unique opportunity of you have someone who has never been exposed to anything. He's 1 year old.
Sure.
So as you move forward, it's really, I view it as it's our responsibility as parents to try to guard what he sees until we, and slowly bring him along. And so it's definitely a challenge as we try to look at, okay, well, how you do that? What things do you watch? What do you not watch? And I think also the thing like that my parents probably never realized is you assume sometimes that kids aren't paying attention or that they're just in the background.
They are paying attention all the time to everything.
And then you're watching something. Well, yeah, the kid's going to pick up on that and see that. And so so when you are making those decisions and doing those things, I think for me one of the things I think about is, well, at some point he's going to see some stuff regardless because he's not going to be with me. So part of it is what do you curate as a parent so that when they are out there, they can make their own decisions and do that. And it sounds kind of like what you were describing your parents did was very similar to something like that.
There were TV shows that were also kind of filtered.
Right.
And I gave my parents a lot of challenges. So I'm huge for fantasy, sci-fi, werewolves, vampires. I've always been drawn to that. Always loved those things.
Yeah.
Abbott and Costello was great in these realms. But then when you get to the more realistic ones, my parents are like, okay, we'll watch that when you go to bed. And I'm like, I'll go to bed and pretend to be asleep and sneak out.
Yeah. Sneak out into the living room.
Into the living room. Well, because the kitchen door in the living room was there. My dad sat in the chair right when you came into the living room. So I could just hunker down behind the chair and dip my head out and watch.
Yeah.
When the vampire pulled the guy through the windshield and was punching holes through his chest, I went, oh,
And your dad went, my chair doesn't make that noise.
And he turned and he went, I told you this is not for you, you know? And so they were working really hard to do that. And they understood, you know, that concept. And that's the thing, is that you've got to know your child. You've got to be in the relationship with your child. You begin to know more and more, because I would have said, as I did say, no, I can handle it. No, I can handle it.
Right.
That's what I'm supposed to say as a kid.
That's your emotional thinking going. The overriding thought is, I want it.
Yes.
And then everything flows. What do I have to say in order to get this thing that I think I want?
Because I can just will myself through it. It'll be okay. That's what you do, right?
Well, that's just the child's thinking
that's just
of
the child's thinking.
Yeah, insufficient logical thinking.
One of the things that's changed in like the story that you're talking about, you know, we're talking about looking over and seeing something on the TV that parents are watching. Today, there's a lot of parents that have given kids devices that are completely unfiltered.
The parent needs to be looking over the kid's shoulder to see what they're watching.
Yeah. And that's a whole other
we're gonna
series
have a
and course
series on that.
Yeah, on how to handle that. But that is something that you really have to think about, because now there's a lot of people who I know have discovered, oh my gosh, I had no clue my kids were watching these R-rated movies and this and that. But they're doing it because they had access to the Netflix account and they got curious. And then you know, one thing leads to the other.
And I think that, to circle back to the beginning of when I said, be the parent, I think a lot of the point of our material is you have power in your children's life.
Right.
And we want you to use it for good things, because that's good for your child. And we want to encourage you to do that, to take the power that you have and to wield it thoughtfully and for your child's best interest. So when I was saying be the parent, those were the things that I meant, of like, take that power up, use it to influence your child, and then you may and will use it in ways that your child doesn't enjoy, but it's going to be good for them.
Right. It's one of the reasons why they don't eat cake for every meal.
It's almost the same discussion.
It's not good for them, and you're protecting them.
Right.
And you're helping them to learn, here's what a well-balanced meal looks like, and here's how dessert plays into these pieces. Because if you eat the dessert, then you don't have the nutrition, and eventually, you know, there's all kinds of health problems that we have realized through the medical world that happen when you don't have that nutrition. A part of that intentionality that you're talking about is protecting your children, but protecting them in ways that their brains are not yet developed enough to understand about themselves, their interactions with the world in general. I don't fault them for saying, I can handle it.
I want cake for breakfast.
Yep.
Right. Same thing there. I want cake for breakfast. You know, and those are the pieces that it falls onto us as parents. Part of the parenting ideas out there is that kids will just figure it out on their own.
We've got an entire episode reacting to Bluey about that coming up.
Exactly. Yes. And that's not what the medical research and the psychology research shows. There are differences in the thinking of a human being from birth up through life, but especially from childhood to adulthood. They don't have the logical pieces to figure it out. And we talk about that in our manual.
Well, and there's concepts that you hear a lot about, like, you know, save the women and children, right? And I'm not going to comment on the women part of that statement, but like, people view children as something that should be more protected than your average person, right? And I'd thought about that on and off, and I've heard some various perspectives. It's like, why are children more, quote, valuable than adults? And I don't think that there's an increased value to children per se, but we as the adults have a greater responsibility to children to protect them, because they don't have the same capabilities as an adult of protecting themselves.
Right.
So it's not a question of value. It's a question of like capability. What's the child's capability, and then the responsibility of the adults to use their increased capability to protect these people who are deficient in some of these ways that they haven't developed yet.
You see the same thing with the elderly in our society. There are protections there for the elderly, because getting older, you're losing different faculties, mentally, to be able to assess certain things per se. You're also losing a lot of the physical strength that you had, the agility that you had throughout your life, which makes you more vulnerable in other ways. And so there are those certain protections at different times and stages in life, and children fall into one of those pieces as well.
And we think that there are certainly some potentially dangerous things for a developing child's mind in a film like Deadpool. And that's what we wanted to give parents the ability to use their increased capabilities to protect their more vulnerable children from.
And I've sort of reduced this down to 2 notes that I have here. The first one is be the parent. And the second one is don't let your 9-year-old watch Deadpool.
No, that was episode 1, Josh. We already covered that.
True. So,
we already covered that.
That's from
Did
the
you watch
2
episode
episodes.
1?
Yeah. So if you didn't watch episode part one, make sure you watch that. And speaking of that, we have a lot of other episodes. We have a lot of great courses and content and things that are on our app and on our website. You can check that out by going to the App Store, searching for Empowering Choices Parenting, or go to empoweringchoices.community on the web and learn all about what we have. And we will see you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.